What is up, course heroes? Welcome to yet another video. This is your boy Amit, and today we are looking at things you shouldn't do when using NotebookLM. Let's get started. Alright, I am inside my podcast.co account. Here, as you can see, I have about 8 shows that I have launched. Around those 8 shows spread out is about 530 episodes, 4,000 downloads. So I've learned a thing or two about how to use Google Notebook, and here I'm going to share those tips and tricks with you so your next Google Notebook project can go smooth. So without further ado, what I want to do is first jump into 2 of my podcasts that are kind of the ones that I'm putting most of my effort in. The first one is the Quantum Drift. So this has about 201 episodes. It's all about AI, and I can go in here and see how many downloads I have per episode. I also have this connected with my Spotify account, but I haven't connected it with any other directories. If I did, I think those numbers would be quite high. Now, if you're first starting out and you just want to test this proof of concept, see if this is the right tool for you to create your AI podcast, what I would suggest is use Spotify for your hosting instead of going with podcast.co, because you're going to have to pay podcast.co $19 a month, whereas hosting it on Spotify is completely free. So once you've set up your podcast, next comes making your episodes. There's a few things I want to show you as you go start using Google Notebook, and these things have saved me tons of time over the period of those 4,000 downloads and 400-ish odd episodes. So I'm going to give you those tips and tricks. So this is my Trello board, and in here I keep track of all of my podcasts and what episodes I want to release next. So if we go down this line here, let's go to the latest one, which would be this one right here. This was on December 10th that I added this Trello card, and today, the day of the recording, is about 5 days later. So this is the latest news that I had saved for AI. So first thing I would do is copy and paste the text on this page. Now you can also copy the URL and put it in Notebook, but most of these sites have block crawling and you're going to run into that. So it becomes more of a tedious effort to first put in the URL, then figure out, oh, this URL cannot be crawled. Then you have to go back and copy and paste the text. So now I just copy and paste the text every single time. I don't even bother with the URL. Let me show you what happens if that URL is blocked. If this is your first time using Notebook, you're gonna go and create a new one. So just click on create new. Your view might look a little different. If you have the grid view enabled, it would look something like this. And you might have their default Westward Mushrooms book in here. So I'm going to change it to my list view and then click on create new. The first thing Google is going to ask you is what sources do you want to upload to generate this podcast? The more sources you give it, the more raw material it has to talk about. I typically either go with website or copy text. So if we go with website, I'm going to paste the URL. The one website that works all the time is Reddit. So if your podcast is based off a topic that has a lot of Reddit threads, which my money podcast is, then you don't need to copy and paste the text. So this is the URL. I'm going to hit insert. Now, if this turns red, which as you can see it did, or whatever color that is, that means that Google is not able to crawl the website, so it cannot generate the article summary for you. What I do instead is I have a snippet of code. It's a piece of JavaScript that I have saved as a favorite, and I'll put that in the description. So whenever I click that piece of JavaScript, any text on this page gets copied. I'm going to say okay. We're going to go head back to Notebook, click on the Notebook guide and click on upload sources. Here I'm now going to paste that copied text. So this is the first piece of information that is key as you start or as you continue your Notebook journey, is to realize these shortcuts. And this first one is using that piece of JavaScript. So you can just copy text from any page. Now, of course, that's not going to work for pages that have a paywall, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post. So if you're getting your data from those sources and you don't have their paid subscription, that piece of JavaScript code is useless. And I just move on and I don't publish that story. Once you've done that, you're going to hit insert. At this point, you can customize your podcast host topic. So how I do that is I hit the customize button, and Google has given you some prompts on things you can tell your AI to do. What I've done is I have saved all of this in a Google Sheet. So I'm going to grab that from the Google Sheet and paste it here so you can see what my custom prompt is. So here's my prompt. It says, begin the podcast by introducing yourselves. Your name is Robert Loft and Haley Hansen. Now, if you have picked two hosts, the names are not necessarily clear whether it's a male or a female. Sometimes the AI can get confused and the male will introduce themselves with the female name and the female will introduce themselves with the male name. So that's another thing to note. And also Google only currently has two voices, one American male and one American female, and I have not found a way to customize that. Of course, once you export this to your own audio editing software, you can play with the level of pitch on that voice and maybe make it sound different. I just keep it the way it is out of the box. So here's my introduction. It says, begin the podcast by introducing yourselves as Robert Loft and Haley Hansen, the dynamic duo behind the Quantum Drift podcast. Welcome listeners to the show, the ultimate destinations for all things AI. Dive right into the latest AI news and trends, but don't be afraid to explore the more curious aspects of AI. So what I'm telling AI here is, you don't have to stick to the script. You can veer off the script a bit and play around with what this customization allows you to do. Just throw random things in there and see what that output is. Once that's done, I'm going to hit the generate button, and now it's going to generate the podcast. At this point, what I used to do is I used to take the same piece of text that I copied, paste it in ChatGPT and have it generate a podcast title and description for me. But what I realize is Google already does that for me. And if I don't like it, I can change it a bit. So that's my tip number 2 is save some time in the beginning. Don't get fancy. Just take the title and description that's given to you right here. So this is my title, and then I use this as my podcast description. Works out just perfect. If Google is giving this to you, that means this is the kind of content that they want to see. So why not just take it from them? So that's my another tip is use the podcast title and description out of the box. Don't get fancy. This is just going to save you time. The next is you don't need to wait here while this audio is being generated. You can go and move on to the next one. And how I typically do that is I'll go pick the next one in line, go to the website, and same thing. I will grab my JavaScript here, go back to NotebookLM, go to copy text, paste it, and hit insert. It's going to do the same exact thing. Now it has the title and the description ready for me. I'm going to go and give it the instructions on how I want this podcast to be customized and hit generate. One other thing I want to show you here, if we go back, you'll notice there are a bunch of X's over here. So what that is my way of telling myself that, hey, I have not published this podcast. So what I do is I open the emoji keyboard, and on the Windows keyboard, it's the Windows key and the period button. I'm sure there's one for Mac too. And I just type in the X. And because I have multiple podcasts, this one is about AI. So I am going to type in a robot emoji. And now I know, hey, this podcast is related to my Quantum Drift podcast, and I have not published it yet. And then I'll move on and do the same thing with the next one and have that backlog of podcasts ready for me. So that's my first step, is creating the backlog by going to articles, copy pasting them into Google Notebook, and then just letting it generate that audio for me. And while I wait, I keep moving on. And by the time I'm on the 5th or the 6th or the 7th one, the first one is usually ready for me to generate. Which brings me to the next important, very important trick, which is if I go to this one, which should already be done for me because this one was done a while ago, always listen to the first few 30 seconds ish of your podcast, because sometimes the AI messes up. So here I have a 19-minute show, and what I want to do is I'm going to hit the play button and hear it out.
Hey everyone, ready for a wild ride? Today we are diving deep on OpenAI's O1 model.
Ooh, yeah. This one's a doozy.
We're going to go way beyond like the surface level.
Perfect. That sounds great. They were about to get into the introductions. So typically the hosts riff with each other a bit, or sometimes they go straight into the intros. That's something you cannot control. If you want that kind of granular control, take their intro clip. So that's my next step. Take their intro clip and save it. So if you want to then export this out and always have that same intro clip, you can always put that in your audio editing software as the intro and the outro, so you don't have to wait and see when the hosts are going to introduce themselves. Now, a few things to note here. There's a thumbs up and thumbs down button to kind of tell Google, hey, did I like this generation? Did I not like it? You can also share this with someone. So you can enable the public access link and hit the copy share button. And then finally, you are going to be able to download it from here or delete it or change the playback speed. What I typically do at this point is download it. Now, before you download, one important thing, which is our next tip, is to put the .mp3 in front of your title, or else when you download this, it's going to default download as a .wav file, which is not accepted by podcast.co. So if you download this as a WAV file, you'll need to convert it into an MP3 file using an audio converter in order to upload it to podcast.co. Some hosts might allow WAV files, podcast.co doesn't. So I actually found this by accident because I had a period in here, but after that period I had like .ai and it wanted to download in that format, and I would download my WAV files, convert them, and then upload them. And then one day it clicked to me, let's try it with .mp3 and see if it does it on the fly conversion, and it does. So just remember to name your title .mp3 at the end. This way you already have the mp3 file, unless of course the podcast host that you're using allows for WAV files, then you don't have to worry about that. So speaking of podcast.co, that's where my next tip comes in. Regardless of what podcast platform you're using, I think most of them allow you to use seasons. So for example, this one is season 4. I can look at season 3. I can look at season 2, and so on and so forth. Now my recommendation is you don't mess with seasons. And here's why. Anytime you upload a podcast, let me show you an example. So here I'm trying to upload a podcast. Anytime you do, it's going to ask you for a season number. And sometimes I lose track and don't remember what season it was. So you're better off just not using seasons unless that's something you really care about. So that would be my another tip, is don't worry about using seasons unless that's something you really want. And the final tip that I have for you is try not to use too many jargons. If your industry has a lot of jargons, make sure you give this podcast a full listen, because sometimes the hosts, which is AI, doesn't necessarily know how to pronounce that word. And at that point, your listeners are probably going to lose credibility, because if that AI doesn't pronounce the word the same way you're using the word or your listeners are used to, obviously they're going to know that this is not a real person recording the podcast. So just keep that in mind. Those are my few tips on how to speed up your podcast creation. So let's go back to my notebook here. And what I want to do is finally show you the new one. You can see this is the one we created ourselves. Actually, there is one more bonus tip I want to throw in here. Whenever you're pasting a text, especially if that text is something that Google doesn't know where it came from. So for example, if I was to go in here and simply copy and paste this article by highlighting it, Google might not know that this came from CNBC. Well, in that case, what I have seen happen is I have seen the AI host say, we have this great article here from pasted text. I'm like, what the heck is pasted text? So if I go back here, that's literally the source that we added. They were referring to that source as pasted text. So if you're pasting text in here, I would highly recommend that you type in the word source and then type where that source came from. So in this case, I would type source cnbc.com. Then I would go down here and paste the rest of my text. That way you're sure that your AI podcast hosts are going to reference that source when they talk about it. Otherwise, they might just say, hey, we have this great article from pasted text, and your users are going to think, or your listeners are going to wonder, what the heck is pasted text? So just keep that in mind. There you have it, course heroes. That is how you can optimize your NotebookLM functionality. Add those shortcuts in there, use these tips and tricks. Let me know what tips and tricks work best for you. Mention them in the comments below, and until next time, keep creating.